Sometimes the loneliest seat in the room is the one surrounded by family. Emily Parker realized that the moment she stepped into the grand ballroom of the Lakeside Manor in Connecticut. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Soft music floated through the air, and hundreds of guests laughed together while servers carried trays of champagne and appetizers across the room. Everyone seemed happy. Everyone seemed to belong. Everyone except her. Holding her 6-year-old son Noah's hand, Emily forced a smile as she approached the reception area. She had almost decided not to come to her cousin Olivia's wedding, but Olivia had personally called and begged her to attend. Family matters, she had said. Emily wanted to believe that. She wanted Noah to feel connected to his relatives. But the uncomfortable looks she received the moment she arrived made her question that decision. At 31 years old, Emily had learned how to hide pain behind polite smiles. Since her divorce 4 years earlier, she had worked 2 jobs to support Noah. Life hadn't been easy, but she never complained. Her son was her entire world. As they reached the seating chart, Emily's smile faded. Every table had couples sitting together, laughing and sharing stories. Her assigned seat was placed at the far end of table 12. Alone, Noah's small chair sat beside hers. It was obvious that whoever arranged the seating had treated them like an afterthought. Emily quietly swallowed her disappointment and led Noah toward the table. Several relatives looked up briefly before returning to their conversations. Her Aunt Linda offered a fake smile. "Emily, you made it. I wasn't sure you'd come." Before Emily could answer, another relative leaned closer and whispered loudly enough for others to hear. "It's hard attending weddings alone after all these years, isn't it?" A few people exchanged awkward glances. Emily pretended not to notice. "We're happy to be here," she answered softly. Noah squeezed her hand tighter. Emily sat down and adjusted her simple navy blue dress. She couldn't afford designer clothes like many of the guests around her, but she had done her best. Across the room, she noticed groups taking family pictures together. Husbands wrapped their arms around wives. Children laughed beside their parents. The sight made her chest ache, not because she wanted luxury, but because she wanted Noah to feel normal. Then came another painful comment. Aunt Linda looked around the room and asked with forced innocence, "So, Emily, are you still single?" The table suddenly became quiet. Emily nodded politely. "Yes." Linda sighed dramatically. "Well, maybe one day you'll meet someone. A boy really needs a father figure." Emily felt her cheeks grow warm. She opened her mouth to respond, but stopped herself. She refused to create drama on Olivia's special day. Instead, she smiled and focused on Noah. But deep inside, she felt completely invisible. Surrounded by family, surrounded by hundreds of people, Emily Parker had never felt more alone. Emily lowered her eyes and focused on cutting Noah's chicken into smaller pieces, hoping the uncomfortable moment would pass. Around them, conversations resumed as if nothing had happened. The sound of laughter filled the ballroom again, but Noah had become unusually quiet. That worried Emily more than the rude comments. Her son was normally cheerful and curious. When he became silent, she knew something was wrong. A few minutes later, the wedding photographer gathered families near the dance floor for pictures. Emily watched relatives happily line up together. Grandparents stood beside their children. Couples wrapped their arms around each other, and little kids smiled between their mothers and fathers. Noah stared at them with wide eyes. Then he looked up at Emily. "Mom," he asked softly. "Yes, sweetheart. Why are we not taking pictures with everyone?" Emily forced another smile. "We can take our own picture later." Noah nodded, but his innocent face remained serious. After several seconds, he asked the question Emily had secretly feared for years. "Why does everyone else have somebody?" Her heart tightened. Emily gently brushed his blonde hair away from his forehead. "Because every family is different." Noah looked back toward the dance floor. "Did I do something wrong?" Emily immediately pulled him closer. "No, baby. You did nothing wrong." His blue eyes began to fill with tears. "Then why does nobody want us here?" Those words shattered her. Emily felt tears threatening to appear, but she quickly blinked them away. She could survive judgment from adults. She had endured that for years. But hearing her little boy believe he was unwanted was unbearable. "Noah, listen to me." She cupped his face gently. "You are loved more than anything in this world. Do you understand me?" He nodded slowly, but she could tell he still felt hurt. Before Emily could say anything else, 2 boys around Noah's age ran past their table laughing. One of them stopped and pointed toward Noah. Come on, we are taking family pictures with our dads. The boys ran away again without realizing the pain they had caused. Noah looked down at his small plate and whispered, I wish I had a dad too. Emily closed her eyes for a moment. She had spent years trying to give Noah everything he needed. She worked overtime. She skipped meals sometimes so he could have new shoes. She attended every school event and every soccer practice. But in that moment, she felt like she had failed him. A single tear escaped down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away before Noah could see. Then a calm male voice spoke from behind her. Excuse me. Emily turned around and found herself looking into the kindest gray eyes she had ever seen. Standing beside their table was a tall man in a perfectly tailored black suit. His expression was gentle, but there was something powerful about the way he carried himself. He glanced toward Noah before looking back at Emily. I could not help overhearing, he said quietly. Then he offered a warm smile to the little boy. If your mother allows it, maybe tonight does not have to feel so lonely. Emily quickly stood up, surprised by the stranger's sudden appearance. Up close, he looked to be around 40 years old, with neatly styled dark blonde hair and a calm confidence that immediately drew attention without demanding it. There was no arrogance in his expression. Instead, his eyes carried a quiet kindness that Emily had not experienced from anyone all evening. I am sorry, she said politely. Do we know each other? The man smiled gently and shook his head. No, my name is Ethan Walker. He extended his hand. Emily hesitated before shaking it. Emily Parker. Ethan nodded and then crouched slightly so he could speak to Noah at eye level. And you must be Noah. The little boy looked surprised. How did you know my name? Ethan pointed toward the small place card sitting beside his plate. Noah giggled softly for the first time that evening. That was smart, he admitted. Ethan smiled. I have my moments. Emily noticed how naturally Ethan spoke to children. There was nothing forced about it. Noah seemed comfortable around him almost immediately. Still, she remained cautious. Thank you for your kindness, Emily said. But we are fine. Ethan looked toward the crowded dance floor before lowering his voice. No, you are being brave. There is a difference. Emily froze. Those words struck deeper than he could possibly know. For years, people had praised her strength without understanding how exhausted she truly felt. Ethan glanced toward Noah again. Children notice more than adults realize. He paused before adding softly, and no child should feel unwanted. Emily swallowed hard. Before she could respond, the wedding coordinator announced that family pictures would begin again in 5 minutes. Noah's expression immediately changed. The sadness returned to his face. Ethan remained silent for several seconds, as though carefully considering something. Then he looked directly at Emily. I know this may sound strange. Emily raised an eyebrow. Probably. Ethan smiled faintly. But would you consider allowing me to help? Help how? Emily asked cautiously. He took a slow breath before answering. For one evening only, let me stand beside you and Noah. Emily stared at him in confusion. I do not understand. Ethan leaned slightly closer and spoke quietly enough that only she could hear him. Pretend I am your husband tonight. Emily nearly dropped the napkin she was holding. Excuse me. Ethan immediately raised both hands. I know how that sounds. I am not asking for anything inappropriate. I simply hate seeing people treated like outsiders. He glanced toward Noah, and I think your son deserves one happy memory from this wedding. Emily searched his face for any hidden motive, but all she saw was sincerity. Why would you do this for complete strangers? She asked. Ethan looked toward the ballroom for a brief moment before answering. Because I know what loneliness feels like. Before Emily could ask another question, Noah tugged gently on her sleeve. Mom, he whispered, can the nice man stay with us? Emily looked down at her son, then back at Ethan Walker. And for the first time that evening, she found herself wondering if miracles sometimes arrived in the most unexpected ways. Emily should have said no. Every sensible thought in her mind told her that accepting help from a stranger was a terrible idea. Yet when she looked at Noah, she saw hope returning to his little face for the first time that evening. And when she looked back at Ethan, she saw nothing but genuine concern. After a long moment, she finally nodded. Just for tonight, she said quietly. Ethan smiled warmly. Just for tonight. Noah's eyes widened with excitement. Really? Ethan grinned at him. Only if your mom approves. Noah immediately wrapped his arms around Emily. Please, Mom. Emily laughed softly despite herself. All right. Within minutes, something remarkable happened. Ethan naturally stepped into their world as though he had always belonged there. When the photographer called families forward, Ethan stood beside Emily and placed a respectful hand gently behind her back. Noah stood proudly between them, his smile brighter than she had seen in months. "Perfect," the photographer said. "Everybody look happy." This time, Emily did not have to pretend. For one brief moment, they looked like a real family. As they returned to their table, the reactions around them changed instantly. Relatives who had ignored Emily earlier suddenly became interested in conversation. Aunt Linda blinked in surprise. "Emily, you never mentioned your husband was coming." Emily nearly choked on her water, but Ethan answered smoothly. "Last-minute business changes allowed me to make it." His voice was calm and polite. Aunt Linda smiled awkwardly. "Well, we are certainly glad you could join us." Noah looked up proudly. "He took pictures with us." Ethan leaned down and whispered dramatically, "Best part of my evening so far." Noah burst into laughter. During dinner, Ethan listened patiently as Noah talked about dinosaurs, soccer, and his dream of becoming an astronaut. He asked questions with genuine interest, never once checking his phone or appearing distracted. Emily found herself quietly observing him. Most adults politely tolerated children's conversations. Ethan seemed to enjoy them. After dinner, music filled the ballroom and couples headed toward the dance floor. Noah tugged on Ethan's sleeve. "Do husbands dance with wives?" Ethan smiled. "Usually." Noah looked at Emily. "Mom never dances." Emily laughed nervously. "That is because I am terrible at it." Ethan stood and extended his hand toward her. "Fortunately, I am not judging additions tonight." Emily hesitated, embarrassed. "I really should not." "One song," Ethan said gently. "No expectations." Noah clasped his hands together dramatically. "Please, Mom." Emily finally accepted his hand. As they stepped onto the dance floor, several heads turned toward them. Ethan moved with quiet confidence, guiding her carefully. There was nothing uncomfortable about it. No pressure. No pretense beyond the story they had agreed to tell. "Relax," he said softly. "You are doing great." Emily laughed nervously. "I have not danced with anyone in years." "Then I am honored to have the first dance." She looked up at him in surprise. The sincerity in his eyes caught her off guard. Across the room, Noah sat in his chair smiling proudly while relatives who had ignored Emily all evening suddenly watched them with curiosity. For the first time since arriving at the wedding, Emily no longer felt invisible. And without realizing it, neither did Noah. As the music ended, Emily stepped away from Ethan with a smile she had almost forgotten how to wear. Around them, guests returned to their conversations, but she could still feel curious eyes following them. Somehow, during the last hour, everything had changed. People who had barely acknowledged her existence earlier now greeted her warmly. Even Aunt Linda suddenly seemed unusually friendly. Emily found the sudden transformation both amusing and sad. Apparently, respect came easier when people believed a woman had a successful husband standing beside her. Noah ran over to them, his cheeks red with excitement. "Mom, you were smiling the whole time," he announced proudly. Ethan laughed softly. "Your mother is actually a very good dancer." Emily shook her head. "Now you are just being kind." Before Ethan could answer, a middle-aged man wearing an expensive suit froze several feet away. His eyes widened in disbelief. He stared directly at Ethan as though he had seen a ghost. "Excuse me," the man said cautiously. "This may sound strange, but are you Ethan Walker?" Emily noticed Ethan become slightly uncomfortable for the first time that evening. He offered a polite smile. "Yes." The man's mouth fell open. "Ethan Walker from Walker Holdings?" Nearby conversations suddenly quieted. Several guests turned toward them. Emily blinked in confusion. The man continued excitedly. "I attended a business conference in Boston last year. You gave the keynote speech." Ethan nodded modestly. "That sounds familiar." The man shook his head in amazement. "Sir, your company employs thousands of people. My brother works for one of your subsidiaries in New York." Emily stared at Ethan in complete shock. Walker Holdings. She recognized the name immediately. Even she had heard about the company. It appeared regularly in business magazines and financial news. Before she could process the information, the bride's father, Richard Collins, approached quickly. The moment he saw Ethan, his expression changed completely. "Mr. Walker?" he asked in disbelief. "I cannot believe you are actually here." Ethan extended his hand politely. "Good evening." Richard looked almost speechless. We met briefly 2 years ago during the Hartford Business Foundation Gala. Ethan smiled apologetically. I am afraid I meet many people at those events. Richard laughed nervously. Of course. Of course. Within minutes, whispers spread across the ballroom. Guests discreetly searched their phones. Some exchanged shocked looks. Others stared. Openly. Emily stood frozen beside Ethan. Her mind struggled to connect the gentle man who had comforted Noah with the powerful executive everyone suddenly seemed desperate to impress. Yet Ethan himself had not changed at all. He still held Noah's small hand. He still smiled kindly. He still looked slightly embarrassed by all the attention. Noah tugged on Ethan's sleeve. Mr. Ethan? Ethan looked down immediately. Yes, buddy. Are you famous? Several adults nearby chuckled quietly. Ethan smiled. Not really. Noah considered that answer seriously. Good. Because famous people are usually weird. Ethan burst out laughing. That might be the most honest thing anyone has said to me in years. Emily could not stop smiling. But deep inside, one question echoed through her mind. Why would a man with everything choose to spend his evening comforting a lonely woman and her little boy? The attention surrounding Ethan continued to grow, but he handled it with remarkable patience. After politely greeting several guests, he quietly excused himself and returned to Emily and Noah as though nothing unusual had happened. That simple gesture surprised Emily more than his wealth ever could. Most people would have enjoyed the admiration. Ethan seemed relieved to escape it. Noah was busy finishing a slice of chocolate cake when Ethan sat beside him again. Mission accomplished, Ethan whispered dramatically. You defeated the cake. Noah laughed. It was a close battle. Watching them together made something warm stir inside Emily's heart. For years, she had carried every burden alone. Seeing someone treat her son with such effortless kindness felt almost unreal. After Noah became distracted by the dessert table nearby, Emily finally gathered enough courage to ask the question that had been bothering her. Why are you really here tonight? Ethan looked toward the dance floor before answering. The bride's father invited several business associates months ago. I was supposed to stop by briefly as a courtesy. Emily frowned slightly. But everyone acted surprised to see you. Ethan smiled. Because I almost did not come. Then why did you? She asked. He took a slow breath. Honestly, I planned to stay 15 minutes and leave. Emily studied his expression carefully. What changed? Ethan's eyes met hers. You did. She blinked in surprise. Ethan quickly clarified. Not in the way you think. He glanced toward Noah. I walked into the ballroom and saw a little boy trying very hard not to cry while his mother pretended she was not hurting. Something about that moment made me stop. Emily lowered her eyes. You barely knew us. Sometimes you do not need years to recognize pain, Ethan said quietly. There was something in his voice that made Emily look back up. You have experienced it too, have you not? She asked softly. Ethan remained silent for several seconds. Yes, he finally admitted. More than once. Before Emily could ask further questions, Noah returned carrying 2 cookies and proudly handed one to Ethan. Partners share dessert, he announced. Ethan accepted the cookie with complete seriousness. An excellent rule. Noah smiled and ran off again. Emily laughed softly. He likes you. Ethan watched the little boy affectionately. He is easy to like. Then he added quietly, You raised a wonderful son. Those words nearly brought tears to Emily's eyes. No one had said that to her in a very long time. People often judged her circumstances, but very few recognized her efforts. Thank you, she whispered. Ethan nodded gently. You should hear it more often. Across the room, guests continued stealing glances toward them. Yet neither of them seemed to notice anymore. For the first time all evening, Emily felt calm. Safe, even. Then Ethan checked his watch and sighed softly. I should probably leave soon. Something unexpected happened inside Emily's heart at those words. For reasons she could not explain, the thought of him walking away suddenly made the ballroom feel lonely again. As the evening slowly came to an end, guests began saying their goodbyes and collecting wedding favors near the exit. The ballroom that had once felt cold and unwelcoming now seemed strangely peaceful to Emily. She almost could not believe that only a few hours earlier, she had wanted to leave before dinner. Noah had fallen asleep against her shoulder, exhausted from dancing and eating too much cake. Ethan smiled when he saw the little boy sleeping peacefully. Looks like someone had a successful evening, he whispered. Emily smiled. Thanks to you. Ethan shook his head gently. No, thanks to him. Children have a way of reminding us what actually matters. Together they walked toward the parking area outside the venue. The cool evening air felt refreshing after hours inside the crowded ballroom. Emily carefully placed Noah into the back seat of her aging Honda Accord and covered him with his small blanket. When she closed the door, she found Ethan standing beside her with his hands in his pockets. For a moment, neither of them spoke. It felt strangely difficult to say goodbye. Finally, Emily smiled softly. I still cannot believe tonight happened. Ethan laughed quietly. Neither can I. She looked at him seriously. Thank you. Not because you were successful. Not because everyone suddenly treated me differently. Thank you because you made my son feel important. Ethan's expression softened. He already was important. I simply helped him see it. Emily felt emotion rising in her chest again. You do not know how much that means to me. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and removed a simple business card. In case Noah ever wants to discuss dinosaurs or astronaut training again. Emily laughed softly as she accepted it. Their fingers briefly touched, and both of them seemed slightly surprised by the unexpected warmth of the moment. Will I ever see you again? She asked before she could stop herself. Ethan looked genuinely surprised by the question. Then he smiled. I hope so. Emily glanced down at the card and nodded. Maybe I will call. Maybe you will. Ethan agreed. Just then, a black luxury sedan pulled up beside them. The driver stepped out immediately. Mr. Walker, your flight leaves in 2 hours. Emily blinked. You are leaving tonight? Ethan nodded. Chicago. I have meetings tomorrow morning. Something inside her sank unexpectedly. Of course, she said quietly. Business never sleeps. Ethan smiled apologetically. Unfortunately not. He looked toward Noah sleeping inside the car. Then he looked back at Emily. Take care of yourself, Emily. You too, Ethan. For a brief second, it seemed as though he wanted to say something more. But instead, he simply smiled and stepped toward the waiting car. Emily watched as the sedan disappeared into the darkness. The parking lot suddenly felt much quieter. She climbed into her car and sat in silence for several moments. In the back seat, Noah stirred slightly and murmured sleepily. Did Mr. Ethan go home? Emily smiled sadly. Yes, sweetheart. Noah hugged his blanket and whispered one final sentence before falling asleep again. I already miss him. Emily stared at the business card resting in her hand. The truth was, she already missed him too. Life returned to normal after the wedding, but somehow normal no longer felt the same. Every morning, Emily rushed between preparing Noah for school and working long hours at the local accounting office. Bills still arrived. Laundry still piled up. Nothing about her daily routine had changed. Yet something inside her had. Occasionally, she caught herself thinking about Ethan Walker and immediately scolded herself for being unrealistic. Men like him belonged to a completely different world. Their lives intersected for one evening and nothing more. That was what she kept telling herself. Noah, however, had different ideas. Nearly every day after school, he asked the same question. Did Mr. Ethan call? Emily would smile and shake her head. Not today, sweetheart. One Saturday morning, Noah sat at the kitchen table coloring pictures while Emily balanced her monthly budget. Without warning, Noah held up his drawing proudly. It showed 3 people standing together beneath a bright sun. Look, Mom. It is us. Emily smiled. That is beautiful. Then she noticed the third figure. Is that Mr. Ethan? Noah nodded happily. He is taller because he is a grown-up. Emily laughed softly, but her heart tightened. She did not want her son becoming attached to someone who had probably already forgotten them. 2 weeks passed. Then 3. Eventually, Emily convinced herself that the wedding had simply been a beautiful memory. Until one Tuesday afternoon. She was leaving work when her phone rang. Unknown number. Hello, she answered. There was a brief pause before a familiar voice spoke. I was beginning to think you hated business cards. Emily stopped walking immediately. Her heart skipped a beat. Ethan, in the flesh. Well, technically over the phone. She laughed despite herself. I did not expect to hear from you. I know, he admitted. I should have called sooner. You are a busy man. Busy is not always an excuse, he replied quietly. His voice carried a sincerity she remembered well. How is Noah? Emily smiled automatically. Still planning his astronaut career. Ethan chuckled. Excellent. Somebody has to save the rest of us. They talked for nearly 40 minutes. About work. About Noah. About ordinary things. And somehow it felt easy. comfortable, familiar. Over the next several weeks, the calls became regular. Sometimes Ethan called from airports, sometimes from hotel rooms, sometimes simply because he wanted to hear Noah tell another dinosaur fact. But the more Emily enjoyed those conversations, the more frightened she became. One evening, after hanging up, she sat alone in her living room and stared at the ceiling. This was dangerous. She knew how these stories ended. Rich, successful men did not build lives with women like her. Eventually, reality always won. The next morning, Ethan called again. But this time, Emily let the phone ring. And when he called later that evening, she did not answer. By the third day, his messages became concerned. Emily, is everything all right? She read every message but replied to none of them. Because the truth was simple. Losing someone after falling in love hurt far more than never falling in love at all. And Emily Parker was terrified that her heart had already started making promises her mind knew could never come true. 3 days after Emily stopped answering his calls, there was a knock at her front door on a Saturday afternoon. She assumed it was a delivery driver and opened the door without thinking. The moment she looked up, she froze. Ethan Walker stood on her porch wearing jeans, a navy sweater, and an expression filled with concern. "You flew all the way to Connecticut?" she asked in shock. Ethan exhaled slowly. "You disappeared." Emily looked away. "I thought it was better this way." "Better for whom?" he asked gently. Before she could answer, a small voice came racing down the hallway. "Mr. Ethan." Noah threw his arms around him without hesitation. Ethan immediately hugged him back. "Hey, buddy. I missed you." Noah smiled brightly. "I missed you too." Watching the two of them together made Emily's defenses weaken. Ethan stood and looked at her quietly. "Can we talk?" A few minutes later, Noah sat in the living room watching cartoons while Emily and Ethan stood in the kitchen. "Why did you push me away?" he asked softly. Emily folded her arms. "Because this is real life, Ethan. You have a world I do not belong in." "Who decided that?" he asked. "Reality did," she answered. "You are successful. You travel constantly. People like me do not end up with people like you." Ethan shook his head slowly. "People like you?" His voice remained calm. "Emily, I have attended hundreds of charity galas, business dinners, and social events. I have met actresses, politicians, and executives. Yet the woman I could not stop thinking about was the mother who sat alone at a wedding and still spent the entire evening making sure her son felt loved." Tears filled Emily's eyes. "I am afraid," she admitted. "So am I," Ethan answered honestly. "But I am more afraid of losing something extraordinary because we are both too scared to try." Silence filled the kitchen. Then a small figure appeared beside them. Noah looked back and forth between the two adults. "Are you arguing?" he asked nervously. Ethan smiled immediately. "No, buddy." Noah looked up at him with complete innocence. "Good. Because I was wondering something." Ethan knelt beside him. "What is it?" Noah hesitated before asking quietly. "You do not have to pretend anymore, right?" Emily covered her mouth as tears rolled down her cheeks. Ethan looked at the little boy for several seconds before answering. "No, Noah. I do not want to pretend anymore." Then he stood and faced Emily. "I love your son. And somewhere along the way, I fell in love with his mother too." Emily could no longer hold back her tears. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Months later, in a small ceremony surrounded by people who truly cared about them, Emily and Ethan exchanged vows. When it came time for the rings, Noah proudly carried them down the aisle. And as the guests applauded, the little boy smiled up at Ethan and whispered, "Welcome to our family." Ethan smiled back and answered softly, "Thank you for letting me in."